Okay, everyone has consented to recording, and I think we can all get started. So my name is Sophia, like I said. If all of you could just please introduce yourselves with your names and your pronouns.
I'll go first, okay. My name is Ziggy Walker, and my pronouns are they, them, theirs.
Hi, I'm Jahaira Kwazi, and my pronouns are she, he. It's up to debate. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Wendy, and my pronouns are he, she.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you all. So the first question is, what is Community Care Cooperative Los Angeles?
That's a question that we're all going to, give a little bit on. Community Care Cooperative Los Angeles was born in LA Worker Center at the beginning of the COVID disaster that we're currently experiencing. It was Z and I and our friend / comrade, a video from Community Circle LA and Co-Housing LA, and we were like, okay, what is something that is needed right now? And especially as a bunch of on the ground organizers, when the ground is no longer a place where we can really be, and even on the ground organizers as applies to Z and myself, we're both disabled people, it's different, but it was still, what can we be? And we were like, okay, we can try to coordinate resources getting to people. And so it started in relation to quarantine, and just as social pressures have exploded into the uprising, which we are grateful for, it has just adapted, and we're supporting and connecting people as we can. I'll pass the mic to Z, I guess.
I mean, I also go by Z. I forgot to mention that. But I think Community Care Cooperative LA is just this place where you can find all the resources together, because something, it's not a trouble, but I think it's kind of easier if there's a place where you can find kind of all the organizations in one place, and you're okay, instead of, I mean, I'm mumbling again, but it's it's a place where you can just find information about stuff. And also a big part of our organization is to make it accessible for organizers and for everybody. And so that's something that we do, and it's just, that is what that's what the organization is for. In my own words, I mumble a lot, so just thank you for having us. Oh yeah, that's what we do.
That's where the best, that's where the best responses come from. All of your words just coming out, and thank you. And that was a great answer.
Yeah, thank y'all. You're doing great work. This is that information is probably half, if not more of this thing, and I'm super I just love to hear the way you guys are speaking about it. It's very encouraging, and it's good to know that people are out there really giving a shit and actually thinking about it, you know what I mean, being very forward-minded, because I feel you're doing very important shit is what I'm trying to say. It's very, thank you. Yeah, it's very good. It's just already just from hearing it.
Yeah, and I can't really add much to that. There's raising awareness of hyperlocal organizations, as well as aiding the construction of solidarity between outside resources. So that's my last bit.
That's awesome. So how did you all get into this type of work for your community?
I think I'll go. Well, I started organizing with what Students Deserve. That was my first ever political enlightenment, awakening, whatever. So it was back in high school. I started organizing for educational rights because I'm a product of LAUSD, as I like to say every time they introduce yourselves. But basically, there's like a lot of discrimination everywhere, but since like our focus was educational, that's where I kind of started my organizing. But specifically with this organization, I think Ziggy mentioned it when like COVID started, everybody was just going into a state of panic, but it was also like, where are we gonna get food, or what are we like, how are we gonna manage? And it's still like we're still, and it's not like we have conquered it. Why do I use that word? Okay, it's not like we've overcome the virus. So yeah, I thought, and I always try to see how I can help organizers that I have worked with like in the past. And Ziggy, like I love Ziggy, so every time they do something, I'm like, yeah, I'm down. I mean, even if half of the time like I won't know what I'm jumping into, I'll find out on the way, so like that's how I got involved. Yeah, I love you. Okay.
I was pretty much the same, like Ziggy. I met Z and Ziggy through organizing with Students Deserve in high school. So that's kind of our common ground. And yeah, so same with Z though, like we're just always learning, and Ziggy's always like a forward thinker, and so I'm always like down for anything that's going on. Yeah, especially because it helps the community. Yeah.
Well, Z and Wendy are kind of underplaying themselves. I mean, they're all great organizers and thinkers, and we do a lot of like organizing and thinking and strategizing and theorizing together. But yeah, how we all met was in Students Deserve LA in 2017. We met in 2017 at either a general assembly, or I think all three of us met when we were at a coordinating committee at Dorsey. That's how we met. And we've just always been about the work. I personally started organizing when I was 9 in elementary school. Started with like a group of kids in class. We were fighting social justice and inequity in school, and then Students Deserve was just a natural pathway. And now we're doing other stuff, but still the same thing, still fighting for our autonomy and interdependence unencumbered by the system. So that's what we're doing. And we all help in different ways. Something that's great about how our group is set up is we have community guidelines and agreements and community kuleana. And kuleana is a word that I borrow from the Kanakamoli lexicon, which is Hawaiian. It's a word that I picked up when I was helping out the Kiai on Mauna Kea, and kuleana kind of translates to your responsibility to others in coordination with their responsibility to you. So we all have different kuleana in the group. Z and Wendy are in charge of alternate texts on our posts, and Wendy's in charge of Spanish translation on our posts, and Z is in charge of what people can look out for soon after this. After we host the page Spicy Zine for a day, where that's our launching board for when we're going to be starting to publish some of our own writings and publications that we all think about, and that I put down the writing for and the references for, and then Wendy translates it in Spanish, and then Z organizes it all on these like pretty graphics and whatever. And so that's something that people can look out for. In addition to, we also do political readings, but we, instead of reading a lot of literature that can be inaccessible, what we do is we do politicized readings of children's books and folk tales. So the first one that we did was the famous kids book, The Snowy Day, and we connected it to themes that you see in the access-centered movement and decolonization is not a metaphor, and the coloniality of being, and there were two more in there. There's two more papers. I'm forgetting them, but you know, and we're this weekend soon we should be releasing another reading. There is live ASL interpretation as we're doing that, and we do publish Spanish and English transcriptions that are done by a team member with our group, Nora, who does the Spanish and English translations. Those are also made available, so we can have things be as access centered as possible, because that's really what we are about. Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. We are always learning also as an organization. And I was going to offer this at the end of the interview, but since you just mentioned, you know, like your own publications and everything all of you are working on, if you ever feel, you know, like you want to hop on a radio show at some point, or even host a radio show of your own, you're all welcome to do so with my stamp, you know. Like, that's the great thing about having executive power, is like I feel that you all are doing something amazing for the community, and you can definitely use our platform however you may want to use it. Obviously, we're open to reposting, you know, your stuff to our stories and whatnot, but even beyond that, having a radio show or writing for the blog, or even, you know, if you don't want to make that full commitment, right, of having your own radio show, you could have a podcast, you could just go on one of the news shows and use our platform for whatever you may feel you want to use it for. So that, I'm just putting that out there. Obviously think on it and feel free, even if you might not have the time now, eventually if you ever need anything from UCLA Radio, like obviously we're very much here to help. Temo, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, definitely. I think adding on to talking about the blog, I would love to like repost any original stuff that you guys write, or if you have any ideas about anything you would want to put, I would love to have that on our blog. We get that promoted all over like our socials. That's kind of been like my whole push with becoming like the managers. I think like it was really cool like to hear voices like all of yours, and like I think that's something that we really need on the blog. And yeah, that'd be great, like to have y'all there.
Yeah, thanks, Temo. And so moving into the next question, can you all explain why you think CCCLA is important to the community? I mean, it's in the name, but
I can start. So I kind of wrote down all my answers because I'm a nervous person, but I like to think that CCCLA helps create bonds between various members through the resources we share and highlight. As we continue to rethink safety, community healing, and government control, these community bonds are vital. So yeah, and just making sure that everyone's connected, kind of has access and awareness of what types of resources their own community members are offering. I think that's important. And I think that's what CCCLA is like helping create.
Yeah, I can go. I think CCCLA is important because one of the things I really like about it, so Ziggy mentioned how we do like children's book readings and we analyze it in political context. I think it is such a great thing because, okay, I don't know if it's just me, but I have a hard time like understanding, there's the door. I have a hard time understanding like political theory, like when I'm reading it. It's just a bunch of like complex words, and it's like sometimes I'm like, you know, just read it to me like I'm 5 years old and maybe I'll get it. And so like when we do like kids books, I'm like, yeah, I get it. The snowball is like, you know, you can't take it home because it will melt, like, and like that's what Ziggy like connected to, like, you know, you can't just like hoard a movement, and like kind of has to grow, like, you know, can't just take it home and like lock it up because it's just gonna melt eventually. Anyways, but I think that's great. So like and I also really enjoy like any kind of media like connections to political context, because like it's easier to understand. So like Avatar: The Last Airbender, like it's, you know, I just found out about it. I know, like I didn't grow up in America. it wasn't a thing where I was. So in my 20s, and I'm like, oh my God, like, just fan personing over it. There should be a gender neutral term for that. But yeah, it's just, I think that's why it's important. CCCLA is important because we tried to be as access centered as possible, and one of the way to do that is to make like media or make language in different ways possible when talking about political theory, and that isn't always reading a book. It could, yeah. So that's what we're trying to do. So yeah.
One of the ways that like I think CCCLA is, I don't want to call it CCCLA because there's like another different community resource that's like called that, but just know that we're talking about Community Care Cooperative LA. But one of the reasons that I think Community Care Cooperative LA is helpful and necessary to our community is in the hyper-local connections that it helps foster, like both Wendy and Jahida have said, like fostering the hyperlocal connections, connecting with other hyperlocal organizers and doing that thinking hyperlocally, right? Because as Z was just talking about, as we referenced as we talked about in our reading of The Snowy Day, revolution isn't exportable or importable, right? Each community is going to do revolution differently, as they should, because each community has a different culture. And culture is a part of revolution and a part of what revolution is for. So each revolution should be a little bit different, right? Or each like revolutionary community should be different because each revolutionary community should reflect their own revolutionary culture and revolutionary values. And so that's why I think we're helpful, is by recognizing the fact that we should all like be different, and the value that we all bring is like how we are different is part of the value that we all bring, and part of how we're different is the value that we just try to connect people to stuff. Yeah.
No, yeah, I think the points like the last two of you hit on were really like super important. I think, yeah, like understanding that things don't have to look the same every single place, like that they're like you're saying, that they very much have to be tailor-made, and then that information shouldn't be communicated in a single way, in a way that's been historically elitist, and like that's like the whole academia intelligentsia sort of like, oh, you have to like think of it in this sort of standard. And I think that's something that's so great about like our like the meme generation or whatever, is that like we've kind of realized and like actualized that way of conveying information in like a way that like is like you get the real information, but it's also like you feel it, and I think that's like really important. And it's great to see that you guys are doing this work. And it's really interesting too, because you all have such an interesting background that like clearly for you this like isn't a choice, right? Like I feel like with a lot of like real organizers, this is what, there's a problem, here is the solution, like these are the ways that we have to like tackle it. How do you think people like us, honestly, like with the privilege of these kind of platforms, and like definitely like the more privilege of like my classmates that like that would be on campus, like how do people who pretty much, I feel like a lot of the apathy comes from these people don't have like a stake in the game, right? How do these people, do you think, could be more involved with organizations like yours, or like other organizations that you think need that sort of like real day-to-day support, not just like platitudes of solidarity, like what do you think? And anyone can answer.
We just agree, like I'll take that first. Like, it's honestly an illusion to think that you don't have a stake in the game, to think that this is a conflict that exists like outside of you and separately from you. Privilege, and with race privilege, and with a whole bunch of different privileges, it affects you differently. And you know, definitely materially you are more secure than some of the rest of us, but you know, it's really kind of self-conscious, like it's like self-destructive thinking to think that, oh, this doesn't affect me, and it's kind of like a defense mechanism, right? Like that's what people do when they like, because it's like such a huge problem, it's such a ginormous problem, it's like all encompassing, it takes all of us, and so it's a much easier thing psychologically to say this doesn't affect me, just like it's a much easier thing psychologically, like when you see a lot of class traders or like people who espouse capitalism who are of the working class or of colonized backgrounds, like psychologically it is easier to be on the winning side of a war, right? And they're not going to win, the capitalists are not going to win, but like currently, materially speaking, that is the winning side of the war. And so it's much easier psychologically for people to pretend that's where they are, you know? But for people in that position, it is, you know, kind of what we were doing with Community Care Cooperative LA, because at a certain point we have like 1,000 followers now and we're interacting with a lot of people. That's a privilege for us at this point, that we have to, you know, have a different dynamic with than we would in other areas of our lives. And that's kind of new for us too, because we have a platform and that's a privilege for us. And so what you do with that is you amplify people who are less privileged than you, who don't have a platform or who have a less smaller platform. You give where you can, and you have to think about like always uplifting and centering the most marginalized voices, which is what we try to do. And I'll pass the question to Wendy, if you want to respond on that more, and then Z.
Yeah, I guess something that's really important to do is just self-educate. I think when people go and seek organizations that are already doing the work, they expect to be educated, but I don't think that should always be the case, especially because these organizations are sometimes at capacity and just have so much going on that they're fighting for. But yeah, and that education should, again, like center those that are most marginalized. Yeah. Yeah, just provide resources, skills, time, and for the moment, like financial support. Because it's one thing to be like, oh, I support this organization, and then just do nothing. When those that are most privileged sometimes have the resources to be able to help further amplify or further, I don't know, grow that organization.
I don't really have anything to add. I feel like they kind of summarized most of what I was gonna say anyways. So yeah, just that's all.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think I totally agree with all those points. I think something that like really stood out was how, you know, the real struggle is kind of like keeping people aware of that reality. You know what I mean? I think something that has been encouraging with the recent uprisings is it seems like a lot of people who previously bought into that illusion are kind of being questioning it, you know? But it seems again that the sort of constant news cycle has distracted a lot of people. Do you feel like using Instagram in the way that y'all have, or just like any sort of new media in general, do you feel like that has been like working for you at kind of just kind of permeating more, you know, and like getting more like traction? Whoever wants to go first.
Yeah, it's my question. No, let's go. I think I think new media definitely has helped a lot in organizing. I think especially TikTok. I don't know if y'all have been paying attention. It's just like taking the whole world by storm.
It's so gay.
It is. Oh my god, it's a great app. But we're on Instagram, and most of like most organizers or most information that I find is usually either on Twitter or Instagram. And I realize not a lot of people are on Twitter, but they're all mostly on Instagram. So it's like, it's helpful to exist on that platform if you're, I guess, starting off, because Twitter, I mean, there's a lot of like activists and news people on Twitter for my feed. So that's what I realize about Twitter. But yeah, Instagram, I think it's easily, like, every time I learn something, it's over there. And anything that happens in like other platforms, they usually end up on Instagram. Like Twitter threads, you know, it's now a post, like on Instagram. So I think it's not like, I don't think we decided why we chose Instagram. I don't recall, Ziggy, but if you do, you can answer that. I think it was just like an inclination. But yeah, that's where we started off.
I think you gave the answer. Like, the reason that we chose Instagram is because that's kind of the catch-all for like other places. Yeah.
I mean, even TikTok videos are on Instagram. Mm-hmm. Like, my friend doesn't have TikTok, but she knows because it's on Instagram. So there you have it, folks.
Yeah, and also like what you were saying about like, not Yuzi, what y'all were saying about like a bunch of people waking up, you know, finally, and there's definitely, you know, different places for different kinds of revolutionary groups or revolutionary fighters, and it's definitely some people's job to turn people over, and it's definitely always all of our jobs to be planting seeds, you know. But that is not our primary job. Our primary job, like, we are just unapologetically uplifting voices that we know should be uplifted and sharing information that we know should be shared and connecting people that we know should be connected, because we're not trying to prove anything to nobody, you know. That's our job is not our primary job, as we decided when we in our community agreements and when we created this platform. Our primary job is not planting seeds. That's the main thrust of our work is, because we're not trying to prove nothing to nobody, you know. We know what we got to do. We know who we are, and we're just trying to do that and be that.
I love that. What do you guys like use as your sort of what's the word, like litmus test, I guess, when you're looking for those resources? Like what sort of standards do you feel like you're holding yourselves accountable and you want to, like, you know, hold other people accountable for, in terms of the type of I guess like rhetoric or just like the information?
I can start with this, but like others will follow. So for us, it's kind of like, I'm kind of combining this question with like, how do we find resources and share them with others? So we're still learning, but basically it's a compilation of organizations we're familiar with through the years of organizing, organizations friends or comrades run, and just general research. But when, like, something that's common and that I think I will keep bringing up is like, we try to center the most marginalized. Anytime we like learn of something new, it's like, oh, how can we incorporate this? What are the resources related to this group? How can we make sure that our audience is also aware of this form of oppression and how they can relate to it, how they can, I don't know, build this sense of words are escaping me right now, but we recognize that liberation isn't like independent, it's interdependent. And so when we keep learning about marginalized people, we know that we have to build solidarity, connections, and other things like that, because we're not free until everyone is free. We're not free until we can all understand what it means to be free. And so just kind of that is a part of our litmus test.
Do you want to go next, or? Okay. Yeah, no, like how we find information and post stuff in our page is like, it's a complicated practice. Like, we're always doing research, you know? So it's like, that's just a part of it. As a content producer and as a cultural worker, that's part of your job, you know, is to always be researching and fact checking. So, you know, it's a combination of research and, you know, trust that we've developed with certain groups, you know, always making sure to be like, hey, can you back this? Hey, do you know if this is true? Hey, or hey, can I find this information somewhere else? Hey, like, you know, there's always, you're double checking everything. And also, you know, you're a trained eye. You can like read things and understand like from where it's coming from. Like, I'm not even talking like just the name of the account or just like the hashtags that are used, but just like the literal, you know, diction. And that's not something that I think can be explained in like the 5 minutes that we have for this question. That would maybe be like a 60 minutes interview. But you just know how to read for sincerity and principle if you have it and you have had it for a while, as we've had.
I was gonna mention that, like, because, you know, you come upon like a post and you read it and you're like you kind of have a vibe about it. I don't know if I'm making sense, but it's like you just kind of stare at it for a while and you're like, you know what, makes sense on the surface, but it's kind of, something is off. And if something's off, I wouldn't go forward with it. But that's just how I go about it. But, you know, you, like, I think what Ziggy mentioned, like, if you've been like in it for a while and you kind of I guess you have learned stuff about whatever it is you're again, words are escaping me, like you, Wendy. It's like, you know, you basically, you learn, you grow, and you know what your morals are, and you know what you stand for, and what wouldn't make sense if, you know, it's not like right, or like it's not what you, wow. I'm so sorry, you guys. I think it makes sense. It makes sense in my head. But yeah, so when you read a post, and if I don't vibe with it, and if it doesn't make sense to me, I also sent it to like people I trust, because, you know, I've been organizing with them for a while. I know what I know what their movements are about, so I will like either send it to, like, Ziggy's one of the people I also trust, you know, either Ziggy or like Wendy. Like, we just discuss it and it's like, okay, does this make sense for our movement, or is it like, you know, low-key liberal? I don't know. Does that make sense to you?
No, yeah, 100%. I love to hear like how the way you all like detailed how meticulously you've developed, you know, this like revolutionary perspective, and not just through like theory and like reading stuff, but through like boots on the ground, like actually experiencing. So I think that's like a perfect segue to our last question. To you, how do you think, like, what does all of that combined experience, what is that now, like as of like right now, today, with everything that's going on, how does that shape what like revolution looks like to you?
Who wants to go first?
Being very adventurous today. No, I'm just kidding. I think revolution is a process. It's a very tiring, slow process, but like it's a process. You know, I would wish, like, by the way the world is going, it would go faster, but you know, you can't just snowball it. Anyways, story reference. Just kidding. But yeah, I think revolution to me is like the process of learning, understanding what you're standing for, and then also then going out and interacting with other people who also understood what you just understood, and kind of making sure that like keeps going, and then eventually we'll be ready to burn down the world. No, just kidding. But you know what I mean. Okay. Yeah, I think that's revolution.
The next, same, like, I understand revolution as a process. And this is kind of like, I don't know, not a straight answer, but it is existing and fighting against oppressive systems. It is keeping people accountable, healing. Revolution is intersectional. It is accessible, and it is ongoing. Yeah, and it's collective liberation, which sounds like a buzzword, but it's like, how do you like, what is your connection to your neighbors, and how do you understand, like, solidarity in that relationship? That was my answer.
No, yeah, I really like what both of you guys said, like, especially about, like, the necessity of, like, interdependence and community involvement, and also, Z, like, what you said about, like, revolution is a process. And about that, too, like, the way revolution looks, like, should change. Like, if you ask me, what should revolution look like today, I'm going to tell you, like, it shouldn't look like what it should have looked like yesterday, you know, and it shouldn't look like what it should look like tomorrow, you know, because it's something that revolution is, like, it's fundamentally about adaptability, about those things that we were talking about being access-centered, being accountable, and all of that requires adaptability, right? And so it's about fundamentally those three things. And, like, what revolution looks like for me should not be what it looks like for any of you, right? Because that's, again, like what we were saying about the value of each of us having our own positionalities and perspectives, is that each of us have our own positionalities and perspectives, and, you know, can help our collective liberation differently, right? And that's one of the beautiful things about collective and interdependence as well, is that it allows and supports us all being ourselves differently, you know? So if I had to say one thing about what revolution looks like today, it looks like care work and relationship work. It looks like, you know, just as we have to be careful in our militancy, as we were talking about, you know, we have to be militant in our care work, and that's what it looks like.
Well, thank you. That was very well said on all of your parts, and we appreciate all of you taking the time to speak to us and share your perspectives. I think they're greatly important. So yeah, thanks for that. Is there anything else that y'all want to add? You know, of course, you're welcome to share any resources with me afterwards as well, and I'll do my best to share them or add them in to whatever captions or whatnot. But if there's anything you want to say or add or just like promote right now, feel free to do that.
I'm just gonna say, everybody, please look out for our next political reading on our page. We are going to be doing another children's book reading, but this one is from a cultural folktale that is common in a lot of cultures. It's present especially in a lot of cultures across Eastern Europe and Asia. We'll be doing a reading of Stone Soup, and I'm not going to give away the political messages and stuff that are going to be going with it. So keep a lookout for that. And please keep a lookout for when we're hosting the page Spicy Zine. That's when we're going to be starting to post some of our own original content, our own original writings, and that's going to be awesome. And other than that, please, as some of you were mentioning, you have economic privilege, please boost and donate to the mutual aid funds that we posted on our page if you can. Please do.
Thank you so much. And Stuart, you're welcome to stop the recording now. I don't know if you're listening or not. But that being said, speaking of, you know, donating and whatnot, as an organization, surprise, we've agreed to give you some funding that we have. It's not a lot, but we're donating $50 for y'all helping with this interview, and it can go to wherever you feel fit. But yeah, we have to go through some like avenues and bureaucracy and bullshit like that to get you the money, but we will be getting you the money. So if you can just send me either like a Venmo handle to send it to, or however works best for y'all, we will be giving you that, just because I felt that it was super important that, yeah, like we're a student-run organization, so all of our funding comes from within, really, but we do have the privilege of like having a connection to UCLA, and why not milk it, right, when you guys are doing such an amazing job. And you know, we'll do our best, and we'll try our best to continue supporting you along the way. So thank you. And like I said, if you ever feel the need to use our platform, you can DM us like on our actual Instagram, which is at UCLA Radio. You can DM me. You have my information. You could probably DM Temo if you need to. But yeah, so thank you all so much for the work that you do. Would you like to add? Yeah?
Is it okay if we close out like we usually close out?
Oh, absolutely.
Wendy and Z, like we each take turns saying a phrase of it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so this is a poem by Assata Shakur that is traditional to say at the end of like either a strategy type thing, or like, you know, just when you're trying to make those connections or an action or whatever. So yeah, we can just go, like, we can just rotate. I'll do the first one. It is our duty to fight for freedom.
It is our duty to win.
We must love and protect one another.
We have nothing to lose but our chains. Ashe.
Ashe.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you. We'll be in touch.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone.
Have a good one.
You as well.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.